Welcome to Even Tacos Fall Apart, where we talk about navigating the ups and downs of life with a focus on mental health. I'm MommaFoxFire, and in today's episode, we're delving into the profound topic of trauma healing and the transformative power of emotion-focused therapy. Trauma can have a lasting impact on our lives, affecting our mental, emotional, and even physical well-being. But healing from trauma is possible, and that's where emotion-focused therapy comes in. It is an evidence-based approach that focuses on understanding and processing emotions to facilitate healing and growth. Today, you'll hear my conversation with Julie Hall as we dive into the world of trauma healing and emotion-focused therapy. We'll explore how this therapeutic approach can help individuals process and heal from traumatic experiences and provide insights into the techniques and strategies used in this type of therapy. We'll also talk about things like what situations this technique best suits and who might be better served with a different approach. Whether you've personally experienced trauma or are interested in understanding how trauma impacts mental health, I hope you find valuable information, resources, and inspiration in this episode. So sit back, relax, and join us as we explore the transformative world of trauma healing and emotion-focused therapy on Even Tacos Fall Apart. Because even when tacos fall apart, there's always a path to pick up the pieces and become more resilient. Set up the right way. Oh, yeah, I have to close to do that. There we go. There we go. Now it's looking right. Perfect. Okay. Hello. Welcome, everybody, to another Mental Health Monday. I'm really excited to be joined tonight by Julie Hall. We're going to be talking about trauma healing and emotion-focused therapy. So very good topic. If you have any questions, I'll go ahead and throw this out at the very beginning. We do have a question queue open, so exclamation point queue, follow with your question. That'll get it put into the queue and make sure that I see it, or just ask your question in the chat. I'll see it then either way. So the queue kind of brings it to the top for me, but you put them in however you want and we'll get going here. So a little bit about Julie. Julie holds a Bachelor of Science in Economics from New York University, a Master's in Business Administration from Rutgers, and a Master of Science in Marriage and Therapy from Seattle Pacific University. She's also completing a post-grad certification program in trauma-informed counseling at NYU School of Social Work. She works with students, parents, couples, and families around many issues, including anxiety, depression, disordered eating, and trauma, which we're going to talk about a little bit tonight, and has walked many engaged and committed couples through premarital counseling, which I highly recommend premarital counseling. Even if you think you get along with your partner super well, premarital counseling is a good idea. In part due to her own life experiences, Julie also has a deep desire to walk alongside women and couples who are experiencing fertility challenges and has provided clinical support and facilitation for the Pacific Northwest Mind-Body Fertility Program in Seattle. She is also experienced in facilitating various support groups for sexual abuse recovery and coping with divorce and grief. In addition, Julie has a heart for providing outreach to those in any stage of trauma recovery and life transition and is trained in the practice of mindfulness as well as restoration therapy, emotionally focused therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and dialectical behavior therapy, all of which are tools that she uses in her work with families, couples, and individuals to support them in their journey towards healing and wholeness. So welcome, Julie. Really excited to have you tonight. Thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So I do have some socials for you. I've got your website, Instagram, LinkedIn. I went ahead and popped those into the chat. So if anybody's interested in connecting, feel free to lean on those, and they're there for you. My web captioner is not working. Give me just a second here. I thought that I checked that, and now it's just now it's not working. So let me see here.
Sure.
Okay, this is the thing that I used to have a sticky note telling me how to fix all of it because I can never remember how to fix all of it. I think it's under not accessibility, privacy and security. Site settings, maybe. Microphone. Site settings. Here it is. This is the one I'm looking for. All right, hopefully, let's see if we test that. Yes. Okay, good. All right, now it's working. Perfect. Okay. So again, welcome, Julie. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you. taking the time out of the first Monday in the new year, which is a little bit ridiculous to me, but welcome to 2023, everybody.
Right.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about why you do what you do? What brought you to the mental health field?
Yeah, happy to, Mama. So I, as you mentioned, I got my degree in economics, computer science, business, and was on that trajectory for a while. I worked in nonprofit. I worked in corporate startups, government, and during that time, I got married. My husband and I, we started trying to have a family and have children, and we struggled a lot in with fertility issues and having our child, and it really kind of propelled me into this career path. I remember vividly an experience with one of the healthcare providers that we were working with. He was a reproductive endocrinologist, still is. And I remember we were talking about kind of what was going on with us fertility wise. And he just sort of like slipped me the business card of a therapist who worked with him in his practice. And I remember at the time feeling somewhat offended because growing up, therapy was not something that was affirmed, not something that a lot of people participated in, and it was unfamiliar to me. And so I was already kind of working through a lot sort of biologically that the way that I was receiving what he was communicating to me was that there was something wrong with me. All that being said, there was something within my intuition that told me maybe this could be helpful. And so I did go to that first appointment with this therapist, first time I ever saw a therapist. And it was like the floodgates opened. I just had no idea what I was holding within, what I was navigating emotionally, mentally, along with kind of all of the sort of physical challenges that we were navigating in fertility. And that's really what started it for me. I really wanted to be on the other side with people, being a resource for them in these places where there aren't a lot of resources. And I went back to school in my mid-30s, and then 10 years later, here I am. So it's been a really powerful process, and so that's really what propelled me into this work. It's my own lived experience in the power of therapy, and that's not to say that everybody has that experience with their first therapist, and I saw that therapist I think a few times, and then I was looking for other therapists, and it took some time for me to really find that connection with someone, but that's really what propelled me into this work.
I love hearing that it was a positive experience with a therapist, because so many of us, myself included, had really negative first experiences with therapy. If you went to therapy a long time ago, like I did, for my first experience with a therapist was not positive. And I didn't go back for a long time. I'm so glad that I did, because I love my therapist that I went to after that. She was fabulous. I wish I'd gone to her first.
Right.
But it's one of those things that if you have a good experience, it can be really impactful, just like a bad experience can be. So that's really neat to hear.
Yes, absolutely.
Bite Mark has a question for you. She put it into the chat. She said, "What is your favorite poem?"
Oh my goodness, what is my favorite poem? Anything by Dr. Maya Angelou. She's just incredible, phenomenal woman. Ugh, what a beautiful question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's I Rise is one of my favorites.
Oh,
absolutely.
Hello. Yes.
Most definitely. Do you have a favorite podcast as well?
I listen to so many podcasts. That is my medium, Mama. And so I'm happy to be here on your wonderful podcast. I would say, let me take a look at the ones that I'm into right now. I have been doing a lot of research around spiritual abuse. people who have been in faith spaces who have been harmed by the church. And so there's a podcast called Bodies Behind the Bus that where people share their stories of trauma and abuse within the context of church. And it is, I found it to really be the way that it is conducted, just really validating and affirming for people who have really been hurt. As far as anything particularly fun, trying to think. There's, do you know who Jen Hatmaker is? She's great. Oh, okay. She has written a lot of books, around, healing, and she has a podcast called For the Love. So that's another one of my favorites.
What's that one about?
She hosts it. She talks about a lot of different things: mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, food, just all, a lot of, she's just got a great, fun voice, laughs a lot, and she just is uplifting. I would definitely recommend her podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I put the links for both of those podcasts into the chat, so if anybody's interested in checking them out, you're welcome to do so. So switching gears a little bit and talking about,
Sure.
talking about emotional focus therapy and trauma healing. So trauma healing sounds pretty self-explanatory, right? But kind of start off with broad definitions. What is trauma healing and what is emotion focused therapy?
Sure. So I guess I'll start with maybe the definition that I use of trauma. There are a lot of different definitions out there of trauma. The one that I found to be the most poignant and all-encompassing is the definition by an author. I believe he's also a therapist. His name is Resmaa Menakem. And he describes trauma as anything that happened to us that was either too much too fast, too much too long, or not enough too long. We did not receive adequate support or resourcing. So anything that happened to us that was too much too fast, too much too long, or not enough too long. And so healing from trauma, it is incredibly intentional. The work of trauma healing can be different in different, with different modalities. But it does really, I think, require safety building first and foremost, right? It is, how do we practice really building safety? And a lot of times the therapist is that first person who helps really hold space for you in the midst of what you have been through. Right? And so holding space is really powerful, right? Is having, there other definitions of trauma include not necessarily the trauma itself, what happened in and of itself, but what happened without a witness, without someone actually affirming to you that this really did happen to you. And so that in and of itself can be healing, to have a professional across from you really validating your experience. How emotion-focused therapy really comes into play there, I would say it's twofold. So I am, as you shared, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I chose that particular avenue of the therapeutic modality, as opposed to social work or, sort of other way, psychology, really for the way that marriage and family therapy looks at the issues that we face. And it's really through the lens of relationship, right? How really, what is it that has impacted your sense of essentially safety and danger in relationship? And so what I almost always do with clients is I go back to family of origin, which really is our most formative experience of relationship. And I look at, with every client, I look at 3 generations of family, and I'm looking at 3 particular areas of focus. I'm looking at relational patterns, so things like, how was love given? How was love received? What did conflict look like? What were some of the different communication styles? The second area of focus is what we call narratives, family narratives. And what that essentially is are the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves and the stories that we tell ourselves about the world around us. And those aren't stories that we just make up, right? Those are stories that in many ways are given to us. They're given to us by the way that we make meaning of how we are responded to or not responded to. And so narratives can look like things like, what do we consider to be good? What do we consider to be bad? What are the things that we value? What does success look like? What does failure look like? So I look at patterns, I look at narratives, and the third thing that I look at is trauma, right? And trauma, our experience of trauma informs our patterns and informs our narratives, informs how we see ourselves, how we see the world around us. So I look at those particular areas of focus for two reasons. The first reason that I look at those three areas of focus is to help us move from this question that we can often ask ourselves, which is, what's wrong with me? Why am I like this? Why am I like this? Why do I keep doing this, right? Moving from that question to something that is more comprehensive, which is what happened to me that has in fact made this way of moving through the world adaptive in some way. That I learned this behavior in order to preserve my environment or preserve self, right? So moving from the question of what's wrong with me to what happened to me, right? That has created this kind of impact, right? And the power, I think, of moving to this question is it really helps us develop a beautiful practice that is a table stakes for me in my work with clients, which is self-compassion. Mm-hmm. And self-compassion, it's, we've heard the term, it's certainly a nice way of just speaking to self. It's speaking to self with kindness. All of those things are true. And also, research is out there, particularly coming from UC Berkeley, that tells us that the practice of self-compassion actually opens up the centers of our brain that tell us that we are capable of growth and change. So not only is self-compassion a wonderful way for us to speak to ourselves, kind, it also accelerates our growth, which is so powerful. So that's the first reason that I do this family work. The second reason that I do this family work is to help clients build up their sense of empowerment. So what I have found is that there's kind of this inverse direct relationship between anxiety and empowerment, meaning that the more anxious I generally am, the less empowered I feel. The less anxious I am generally, the more empowered I feel. Mm-hmm. And so when we do this kind of family work, we essentially make the covert overt, right? Everything that has been sort of in our subconsciousness or unconsciousness, we bring it to consciousness to help us really make intentional choices with how we want to move through our adult relationships. For example, like that particular value that has been in my family for generations, maybe it's not serving me. Maybe I just want to leave it where it is and enter into my adult relationships in a new way, break cycles, right? I can make choices. So that's a little bit about the family work. Emotion-focused therapy, I'm just going to share briefly, is in this framework of a hierarchy. So emotion-focused therapy really starts with our understanding of our triggers, the things that activate us, anything that happens to us outside of us that is sending a message from our brain to our nervous system, to our bodies, that's telling us we're under some kind of threat, right? And generally in emotion-focused therapy, we believe it's a threat and it can be real threat or perception of threat. The body does not make that distinction.
Right.
Right. And it's a threat generally to one or more of three things: threat to our feelings of safety, threat to our feelings of love, and or threat to our feelings of belonging. So safety, love, and or belonging. And anytime we experience a threat to one or more of those three things, we move into our threat response behaviors. Fight or flight. You've heard of fight or flight, right? Most of us have heard of fight or flight. Those are very real experiences of threat response behaviors. Fight can be rage, sarcasm, It can be aggression. Flight can be withdrawing, isolating, shutting down, people pleasing. Other kinds of threat response behaviors can look like ruminating, anxiety symptoms, ruminating, overthinking. Another can be numbing out behaviors with substances, with social media, with work, with any kind of addictive behaviors, right? All of those are threat response behaviors. And I'm really mindful to not shame any of those behaviors because they have been developed by our bodies to try to keep us safe,
right?
To try to preserve the environment or preserve self. But what we know about those threat response behaviors is that they're not sustainably effective, meaning that over time, they keep us disconnected from self and from the people that we love.
Yeah.
So what we try to practice in emotion-focused therapy, certainly tapping into what are my triggers, what are my threat response behaviors, and what are my experiences of threat, right? So if you could imagine this with me, Mama, it's like if I am activated, something activates me. It's as if somebody put a t-shirt on me and the t-shirt says something like, I am blank. And the I am statement generally sounds something like this. I am not good enough. I am a failure. I am not worthy of love. I am unlovable. I am rejected. I am alone. These are not pretty stories, right? Which is why the body says, yeah, let's not talk about those. Let's not talk about those stories. They're too tender. They're too vulnerable. Let's just do our threat response behavior because we know that'll work. Right? And yet that story doesn't just go away. Manifest, right? Somehow, sideways, generally, right? And what we know about these stories is that they don't, again, sort of just start, let's say, when I got my first job or when I got married or when I had children. These stories have history. These stories have history, right? And so what we really try to practice in the therapeutic space with emotion-focused therapy is help clients put language to particularly, so certainly the triggers, certainly the threat response behaviors, but particularly the pain stories. We do that with a real intention around safety. When there is activation in the body, we notice that. We do some sensory exercises to help the client stay regulated in the midst of tapping into a pain story so that over time, the body can start to get the message, oh, I can actually recognize and hold space for this particular pain story that's being activated right now. And so as I start to do that, as the body starts to get the message that it doesn't have to go into threat response behavior right away, I can start to practice dropping some of the armor, right? While the armor has been developed to protect, sometimes it can become crushing, right? And so we try to build these practices to put down the armor so that over time I can start showing up in my relationships authentically.
Yeah. Is there ever a time where emotion-focused therapy is not something that's good or could be actually bad for someone?
I don't know if I would suggest that it could be bad for someone, but I think sometimes people have maybe difficulty with the kind of talk therapy work.
Yeah.
Right? Just they're blocked for their good reasons in really kind of sitting with talk therapy. I think that's where a type of modality called EMDR can be really helpful. EMDR is, okay, you're familiar with.
Yes.
Yeah. It's an incredibly effective modality in which there is a very sort of structured process in moving through trauma in a way that kind of helps clients go from where their trauma feels like a 10 to maybe a 7 to maybe a 5 to maybe a 4. And that structured process, I think, can be helpful for some people where they may be blocked from really kind of doing the talk therapy work. So I wouldn't necessarily say it could be harmful, But sometimes it's just not as
helpful. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so for those who aren't as familiar, EMDR is it's eye movement. I can never remember what the D and the R are though. What is that?
Eye movement, I think desensitization reprocessing therapy.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it involves a light movement of your eyes to kind of help you reprogram a little bit in your brain. It's not for everyone. There are definite contraindications for EMDR, but for some people it can be very, very helpful. So Bite Mark says, always happy to hear EMDR recommended. Ninja says, EMDR still scares me regardless of talking, but thinking is better than speaking. Yes, absolutely. Heard it was based on REM sleep. It is based on the eye movements that are similar to what you get in REM sleep. Yeah, so.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I think, again, to your point about contraindications, I think when you're in the throes of addiction, I think that can, that has to be addressed first and foremost, right? I think, that's really important to have somebody who's really trained in addiction recovery in order to really move through trauma work. Right. Yeah. So, there are certainly some contraindications, but I found EFT to be really powerful for people because it really helps us tap into more really this kind of vulnerability within us and practice that safety building around vulnerability. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like hearing you talk about that. It's identifying where those emotions are based from, like what happened in your life that causes you to react that way. I think that's a hard thing sometimes to face, but if you can do it, if you can do the work, as with any therapy, if you can get in there and do the work, it's going to be really beneficial.
Yeah, and it is work, and I'm really mindful of that. And that's where I really just honor anyone who is in space with me. It is incredibly courageous to enter into these spaces.
Do you use emotion-focused therapy when you do premarital counseling or family therapy? Is that what you're using? Is that EFT piece of it, or is that separate?
With relational therapy, absolutely. EFT is incredibly powerful. I mean, I would say with premarital, I use a particular assessment. It's called Prepare and Enrich. And it's an assessment that I use with clients where they actually complete individually an assessment. It comes back with information, and then from there we really kind of do this work around particular topical areas. So what's great about Prepare and Enrich, again, it is this kind of structured format, and it goes through very specific topical areas like finances, like family, like household chores, like how we engage in social life, like our intimacy, right? So it really kind of moves through the process more methodically. And it's generally relegated to about 6 sessions. Whereas emotion-focused therapy, there's flexibility there. I found it to be incredibly powerful with relationships because often what happens when we're in conflict relationally, we are speaking to each other from our threat response behaviors.
Yeah.
So your threat response behavior activates my threat response behavior, which then activates the partner's threat response behavior, and on we go into what we call these negative interaction cycles. And so I always say it only takes one person to elevate. It only takes one to elevate us into a positive interaction cycle, right? If one person can recognize that there's something more vulnerable going on, something more tender going on, whether it be for themselves or for their partner, right? That can be really powerful. And so we practice that in the therapeutic space.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it really, thinking about it as you're reacting to their trauma response and you're providing your own trauma response, like that really explains so many fights.
That's exactly it. Right. When there's something, again, generally more vulnerable that's happening, that's really being activated. There is a pain story that's being activated there.
any specific exercises you would love to see more couples do on a regular basis, or individuals do on a regular basis that focus on emotions and support that connection?
That's a great question, Mama. I would say, I think proactively, I think we could all really benefit from more just mindful practice, right? Just sort of more proactive, mindful practice, giving ourselves permission to sort of sit with ourselves, sit with just our person, just our personhood, just our own humanity, sit in quiet, in stillness. That in and of itself can be really powerful in just developing our own sense of attunement to ourselves, to what is happening in our internal world. For some people, that's a kind of meditation. For some people, maybe that looks like journaling. But some practice that helps me develop kind of a deeper attunement to self, I think can be really, really powerful from a sort of proactive place, which then I think lends itself to us being able to, when there is anything reactive happening, repair more quickly, to catch that more quickly. Really, encourage, I think, a reactive sort of exercise that clients can or people can practice is really recognizing, sitting with what are our pain stories. There's an exercise that I do with clients where I have them actually write down, okay, what are my threat response behaviors? Right? What are some of the threat response behaviors that are familiar to me? They generally sort of choose from a worksheet that I have. But what are the underlying feelings, right, that they are associated with? And I have them recognize those. And so when they can actually see those on paper, it's really powerful, right? Because they can just recognize more quickly when that is in fact happening for them.
Kind of tie it to, oh, that's this. I wrote that down one time. I can point to it right here.
Totally. I mean, I think for myself, I've done this work myself, right? One of my very familiar pain stories is I am not enough. I am not enough. And when that gets activated for me, generally my threat response behavior is fight, right? Like some kind of hostility. But because I've kind of done some of that work, I can tap into, right, when I am activated or showing up in threat response behavior, it's generally because there's a pain story there, right? And that pain story being, I am not enough, or I don't feel like enough. And so when I can see that, I can practice really speaking back to that pain story in the moment and critically evaluating the accuracy of that pain story in the moment.
Yeah. When it comes to trauma healing, how do you as a therapist go about providing a safe space for people whenever they're trying to heal as deep as they possibly can through therapy?
Yeah, it is incredibly tender. I mean, I think my intention is to really lead with curiosity, compassion. I also am really mindful, and I've kind of practiced an attunement to um, body reactions, right? Body responses, right? So if I see a client going like this a lot in the midst of talking about something, or maybe they're rubbing their hip joint, right? Or, there's some kind of physical something happening in this space, I really try to practice as gently and as mindfully as possible, just offering a curiosity about that. We also really practice pausing and tending to any kind of body reaction or response in the time. Breathing, right? Opening up that chest area, right? And I really am mindful to not move any further than the client is, right? I really practice using the language that my client uses rather than offering up other names, unless that's something that the client asks for me to consider. But it is really for me pacing with my client, because trauma is incredibly painful. And we have our very good reasons for being blocked in putting language to the trauma. And so it is just a very tender process, you know. And so I always say I have my 3 C's. It's curiosity, which then lends itself to compassion for what is now being shared. And then from that place of compassion, we move into courage, right? What are some of the changes that I can make mindfully with a mindfulness to risk, right? We practice kind of risk assessment, boundary work, that type of thing. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's great. Here's a question from the chat as well. You mentioned those physical responses. Do you feel like in-person therapy has a benefit over virtual therapy because those signs are easier to see in person? That's a great question. Thank you.
That is a great question. I would say yes. For me personally, I think, you know, there's just kind of a naturally deeper attunement when we are in person. That being said, I have found that the virtual medium has been incredibly effective, incredibly moving. Some of my clients have in fact preferred the virtual medium because of the flexibility that it offers. But to respond to the question, my sense is yes. I think the attunement for me is deeper when I can actually just have that sort of face-to-face experience. Not to minimize or discount the virtual experience, as it is also incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and that's one of the things whenever we switched to virtual therapy because of COVID, that my therapist said. She said that she was having a hard time necessarily calling me out whenever I would say some bullshit. She was like, so much of your communication is in me in particular. So much of my communication is in my body. And so whenever I'm doing something on a camera, like I have to be still. Where if I'm in her office, I might stand up at some point when I'm talking about something, or be more expressive with my hands, or be like, messing with my feet or something. So she was like, it's really hard to do virtual with you because you so much of what you do, your response is in your body.
Yes, I totally believe that our body often speaks before our thoughts can catch up. That's just
absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Good question, Bite Mark. Thank you very much for that. Get off of there. There we go. So when we talk about trauma, the first thing that kind of pops into people's heads immediately is PTSD. But trauma can go so far beyond someone having officially PTSD. So is it only people who have PTSD who should seek therapy for trauma they've been through and try to heal from it?
Great question. No, I would say absolutely. We want to get cared for around PTSD, and that's incredibly important. And trauma, again, that broader definition, anything that happened to us that was too much too fast, which can be one particular incident that has altered my sense of my world as I know it, right? My understanding of self as I know it. So that's the too much too fast. Too much too long can be something like, in and of itself, right? That particular experience does not really have a significant impact, but over time, that the chronic nature of that experience, or something like bullying, for example, it can really chip away at, again, my sense of self or my understanding of the world around me, right? So that's the too much too long, or the not enough too long, right? That can be something like neglect, right, in my family of origin, right? Or anything that I experienced in which I felt like there was a deprivation there, some kind of deprivation there. So I would say that that's what I love about that particular definition. There's a real breadth to it. And I think so many of us can relate to one or more of those experiences, whether it be too much too fast, too much too long, or not enough too long.
Yeah, I think that is a very good broad definition of trauma. Like, so many times you think of trauma and you think that it's something physical, and it's not always something that's physical. So that's a very good way to put it, the expanded piece of that.
That's right. And I think all of, any of those experiences are worthy of being seen, worthy of being tended to, worthy of being tended to. That's what we practice in the therapeutic experiences, tending to those experiences, not just for the sake of tending to them, but they manifest, right? If we are not tending to them intentionally, they manifest sideways.
Yeah,
right?
that's a really good point too.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who feels scared to work on their trauma because they're afraid of being judged?
Sure. And when you say afraid of being judged, afraid of being judged by the therapist or afraid of being judged by people who might be aware that they're going into therapy?
It could be either. I mean, I was thinking they were afraid of being judged by the therapist, but also maybe someone who's afraid of being judged by like family members who know what they've been through and maybe they minimize their trauma or something like that. So either way, yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. I think there are a lot of good reasons that we have for being tentative around exploring therapy. And I just want to encourage people to, you know, uh, consider it or consider even engaging it in a way that is mindful of their safety. So I have often, had clients have a friend or maybe a partner make the appointment for them.
Mm-hmm.
Or I've had people, clients where they've had a safe person actually sit with them in their first session, right? Just to be a safe presence. I think, however, um, we can be mindful of any blocks to get there. Let's tend to those blocks to get you in the room. And, if you experience any feeling of judgment, that is certainly something to be mindful of. I am not, I don't want to minimize that in any way. That is certainly something to be mindful of. It's something that, if we feel, is safe enough to do, we can raise with the therapist in the space or in the next session, or we can, you know, recognize that that didn't feel like a fit, but I think it's really, really important to give ourselves permission to um, have our trauma be tended to, have our trauma be tended to with a professional. And I, and I see you, Mama, what you shared about you've had, initial therapeutic experiences that have been less than pleasant. And that's not okay,
Yeah.
and so I'm just mindful that we don't want to just continue to sit in those experiences. We do want to make a change, but there are some really well qualified, compassionate, caring therapists out there who want to do this good work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not like it was back then. Like it used to be that your insurance would cover a therapist or one of 5 therapists. And now
Hello.
insurance is so much better about either covering more therapists or also there are therapists who offer low cost cash options, at least in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got way more options now. If your therapist is not feeling like a fit, if you are feeling like they are judging you, I would encourage you to have that conversation with them and talk about that, because that might be something in yourself. But if it truly is something that is not a fit, let them know that and then get a different therapist. It's much easier now than it was then. And I wish I had made more of an effort back then, but I didn't.
Got it. For your good reason.
Yeah, but it's good that it worked out the way that it did, because I did find someone who I truly, truly loved. So I think that things happen for a reason, but that's my own personal belief. So if you're not feeling a fit with your therapist, get a different one. It's okay. There's no problem with that.
That's right. That's right.
If you weren't doing
You said it better.
Yeah. If you weren't doing what you do now, or if you'd chosen to do something different, I know you said you kind of went back to school in your mid-30s. What would you be doing instead?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. What would I be doing instead, Mama? I know this sounds so wild, but this is just what I love. This is what I love. I don't know if everything else would, hold a close second. Anything else maybe would hold a close second. But it's just such powerful work to hold space with people who have, stepped into this environment to seek healing and to just be on the journey with them. It's just really powerful for me. Yeah. Maybe I'd be an author or something. I don't know.
I mean, it could
I'd write, maybe.
There's so many different paths that people can take. It's always interesting to hear A, how they got to where they are today, and then B, kind of what could you see yourself doing besides that? But for some people, it truly is a calling. It is. Yeah. You are doing what you are supposed to do, which I think is really beautiful. So that's great.
Yes.
Well, it is time. I have a magic wand, and I don't see it on my desk, so I have to find it. But it is time. Oh, here it is. It is time for our magic moment of the stream. So this is my magic wand, and I'm going to wave it, and you get to eliminate one common opinion or misconception or theory around mental illness, disabilities, or talking about mental health. So I'll just give it a little wave. And now, what would you like to eliminate today?
That's so great. I would say that there's any weakness in it. I just erase that out the gate, that it is incredibly brave, courageous. It is not work for the faint of heart. And it is incredibly beautiful healing work. That is, I think, the misconception that I would get rid of, that it is in any way weak.
Yeah. Yes. Getting help, working on yourself, addressing things that you need to address to improve yourself and your relationships. There is nothing wrong with that. Absolutely not. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger, for sure.
That's right.
So I'm going to go ahead and open it up. If there's anyone in the chat who has any more questions that they haven't asked yet, please go ahead and pop those in. I'm going to post your socials one time. This is your website, LinkedIn, and Instagram if y'all are interested in connecting with Julie offline. And then, Julie, I'll just open it up to you and say if there's anything as far as websites, personal recommendations, or anything we didn't cover. The floor is yours.
Oh, sure. I think along with, I think with the trauma work, one of the things that's really powerful for me is helping clients really tap into younger self, right? There's a beautiful quote that says something like, the lived experience is the younger self and the adult self living in the same body, experiencing life as it is now and as it was, right? And, I think what can be really powerful for us is just recognizing that oftentimes any kind of activation or trigger that we experience, I would describe it, it's like the younger self tugging on my shirt and kind of showing up and saying, we okay? Is this that time where we really felt unsafe? Is this and often a younger self sort of popping up in the midst of something can be disruptive, right? And so we're yeah, go away. Right. But all that does, it just reinforces this message that perhaps we are unsafe. Right. And what we really try to practice is when we get that little nudge from that younger place within us to actually bring that younger place within us close to us and say to that younger place in us, I got you. Right. We're okay. Right. This is different. Right. We have tools now. Right. We are empowered. We can make choices. Right, tend to that younger place in us that was not tended to, right? In, for whatever reason, right? In these kind of fractures in our lived experience. So I find that to be really powerful too, is really kind of being on this journey with our younger self. So that's all. There's a lot of information about my work on my website. Anybody can check that out. So thank you for putting that up.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it's really important that whenever you're working with that younger self and present self, you're providing the protection that you should have had then. You know,
That's
you
it.
got to be the person now that you needed whenever whatever it is happened. And that's hard. That's hard work, but that's how I see it.
Yes. Yes.
So 488 has a question for you, and that is, you mentioned changing language with clients to better connect. Could you elaborate on that some more?
Sure. I think what I said about that is really staying with a client's language, right? So I don't say abuse if a client has not said abuse, right? I'll use the client's language and then we explore that language, right? I don't necessarily even describe it as trauma, right? And again, there's like an attunement practice there, right? I really want to be mindful of where the client is. So we explore with the language that the client is using, that then might kind of open up for them a deeper understanding of their own lived experience. I always say my work is really tapping into a client's wisdom.
I like that. Just kind of reflecting back whatever they're identifying things as back to them in that way.
That's right.
A little bit of validation that way, right? That's kind of providing them whatever they're identifying as. That's that validation.
That's right.
That's great. And then Bite Mark says, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. This has been enjoyable and educational.
Well, absolutely. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Thank you so much, Julia, for joining us. Guys, give me just a little bit and I will be back right after I disconnect with Julia.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode on Even Tacos Fall Apart. I hope you found our exploration of trauma healing and emotion-focused therapy insightful and empowering. Remember, healing from trauma takes time, and it's a deeply personal journey. If you or someone you know is struggling with trauma, I encourage you to seek professional support from a licensed therapist or counselor. I hope that this episode has shed light on the transformative power of emotion-focused therapy and provided a glimpse into the possibilities of healing and resilience after trauma. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would appreciate it if you could leave a review and rating on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback makes a huge difference, and it really does help us reach more people. Thank you for joining me here today. I appreciate your support and look forward to bringing you more episodes that explore mental health, resilience, and finding hope in the face of adversity. Remember, even when tacos fall apart, there's always the potential for growth, healing, and a brighter future. Until next time, take care of yourself and those around you.